Tuesday morning, October the 22nd, and it's 10 a.m. in hurricane season, which means it's time to track the tropics from sunny, beautiful Central Florida. I'm WESH 2 meteorologist Eric Burris.
And in Savannah, Georgia, I'm WJCL 22 Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson.
So, Jeremy, we've had a lot going on the last couple of days in the tropics, even though we're kind of a hurricane season. We had on Saturday two named storms. One became a hurricane, one did not. But nevertheless, that just adds to the list.
Yeah, 15 named storms so far this season, and the one you're showing is Oscar, sort of just barely hanging on right now. There's a circulation, but really the showers and thunderstorms are now off to the eastern northeast of that low.
That's right. And as a matter of fact, Jeremy, I put on the lowest levels on our color table here just to kind of give you an idea. So just by looking at this, obviously here's where all the convection is located, Turks and Caicos, but the center of circulation is sitting right in there. And you can only really see it with these lowest levels, but if I zoom the satellite in, you can still clearly see there is a circulation there. And Hurricane Center has identified that that is still being a tropical storm, moving to the northeast now at 12, with maximum sustained winds of 40 miles an hour. If I'm honest, I feel like it's probably more subtropical at this point than anything else because the
Right.
wind field is as broad as it is, but nevertheless expected to lose its tropical characteristics over the course of the next couple of days and move away from Florida, move away from the Bahamas, and move away from the United States.
And outside of maybe some large swells or something like that, really no impacts for Florida or the southeast coast. So
Right.
that was briefly a hurricane, maybe for a day or so, as it bumped into the eastern end of Cuba, kind of meandered its way through the southeastern Bahamas. You mentioned Turks and Caicos, and now weakening as it travels to the northeast. So once Oscar's done, we probably have a little bit of a lull, maybe 5, 7 days or so, and then we'll have to start watching parts of maybe the Caribbean
Yeah.
once again.
Yeah. The pattern definitely opens up in that window, and so there's definitely something that we'll have to watch. And to that point too, Jeremy, just worth mentioning that now with Oscar being named, that now puts us more than 2/3 of the way through the list of names. I do not suspect that this year will run out of names, but nevertheless, Oscar category 1. And I also wanted to add the fact that Nadine had formed, but contrary to social media noise, Nadine was never a threat to the United States, wasn't a threat, never will be a threat to the United States, at least not this version of Nadine. It's already moved over into the Pacific Basin.
Yeah, so I mean, it crossed over parts of Central America, Mexico. Then it ended up being named in the Eastern Pacific. So remember, that gets a new name. It does not keep Nadine as it goes into that basin. So, yeah, we are going to watch what's coming up here very closely because obviously it'd be of interest also for us moving forward for our hurricane season forecast coming up on March the 1st. So,
Yep.
kind of anything that we see now is sort of a new look and feel and will play a role in what happens next season. So we want all the storms to stay away from the US as we go through fall.
Yeah, it's very, very important. But as you mentioned, the patterns are shifting around just a little bit. Right now, we've kind of had this big dome of high pressure over the southeastern United States, protecting us from Oscar and Nadine. And there was a weather guy that worked in West Palm market with me and then here in the Orlando market with me. He always called high pressure a big bubble of no trouble, but I even saw the Hurricane Center and the Weather Prediction Center using that phraseology. So I guess I have to stop making fun of it. But as that big bubble of no trouble fades late October into early August, and the Madden-Julian oscillation shifts a little bit, we have to watch the Caribbean because models are kind of indicating that there could be some form of development there. And so we've kind of highlighted this for probably the better part of a week, 2 weeks at this point. And consistency in the computer models indicates that that's going to be an area that we have to watch.
Yeah, and I mean, that makes sense. That's where the warmest water is in the Atlantic basin right now. So if we're going to see tropical development, it really favors that area. And if you look towards the southeast coastline now, our water temperature very close to just offshore of Tybee, Hilton Head Islands is in the upper 60s. So that's not something that would fuel tropical development. Obviously, the Gulf Stream waters are a little bit warmer there when you get maybe 60, 80 miles offshore or so of my area. But as you look down to the Caribbean, obviously that's where the warmest water is at. Really need water about 80 degrees or warmer
Right.
to kind of fuel some of these tropical systems or maintain their strength. Now, obviously, the farther north a system would get, if you're talking maybe off the southeast coastline, off the mid-Atlantic, those waters start to cool very fast this time of year, and those waters are not warming up; they're only cooling down more. So, really, tropical development, if it's going to happen, late October into November, it's probably Caribbean, Southern Gulf, or maybe parts of the far Southwest Atlantic, which we just saw.
Right. So let's do this then. Let's take a look at the models, kind of get an idea of what they're showing. When I did my coffee talk this morning, I did it a little early because I had donuts with dad for my son, Jeremy. So, this is going to be the first time that not only are we going to be able to fully look at the 6Z, but also the ensemble. So, first off, what you're looking at here in blues and greens, that's the low pressure from Oscar. Not all that organized, continues to pull away. But high pressure builds into the southeast United States. We've got a really great end of this week and early next week for your area, for my area. But then the GFS is lowering pressure 994, 989, 975, 968. So very near Jamaica and approaching Cuba. This is Saturday, November 2nd. We've got ourselves a decent little hurricane crossing Cuba. Look how close to the Straits of Florida that would be, working kind of right up the East Coast there. That's Tuesday, November 5th, of course, Election Day. And then from there, kind of doing this weird little malarkey. But nevertheless, what the current run of the GFS is showing is a very awkward motion, but it would be a hurricane very near my area and your area.
Yeah, and again, that's the operational one run of the GFS. So we'll take a look at some ensembles. The European model doesn't really go out quite far enough right now. The operational, it does have a low down there, but it's way farther to the east and does not approach Florida, at least the last one that I looked at.
Yep.
So you're going to see huge differences this far out, especially we're kind of nearing the last month of the Atlantic hurricane season. But I do want to remind people back in 2012, we had Sandy develop in the Caribbean late in October, and then it made its way almost due north. It kept hurricane strength well off the southeast coastline, off the mid Atlantic, and then it was kind of that hybrid system that eventually curved back in to parts of the mid Atlantic and Northeast. So that was definitely a devastating storm.
Yeah, well, and hurricane season's not over with. And as Jeremy had mentioned, when he and I work on our long range forecast for the 2025 hurricane season, all of these things that we're observing right now play into it. And that's why more than just watching what's happening now, we also have to add the gravity of this all could play into next year's hurricane patterns. So we're watching very. I wouldn't even say that it's closer than any normal season, but while many people may write off whatever happens if it stays out to sea, Jeremy and I are like, watching like a couple of,
Right.
of, of studies here because this is
I'm
this is
even
the
taking
pattern.
notes. I'm even taking notes on
Right.
it, right? I know you
Mm.
love that. But I would say so far, maybe we're several weeks into a new pattern or 2 or 3 weeks. But one indication so far is I would say next hurricane season, maybe our early hints are, hey, watch out towards like Puerto Rico,
Yep.
Hispaniola, maybe
Yep.
Cuba, and parts of the Bahamas. We've kind of had some lows meandering down there
Yep.
so far. Obviously, we'll get many more clues as to what's ahead come the rest of this month and November, and then we'll watch for any recycling over December, January, and February.
Yeah, I love, by the way, this venue to be able to, here it is October, and we're already kind of starting to share thoughts on our next year's hurricane season forecast. And I kind of love this transparency to be able to share with everybody what we're seeing in real time, really and truly.
I think it's fascinating, and if you want to show ensembles, if you have that
Yep.
available, we can take a look at that because obviously that GFS run that was kind of scary to a lot of
Yes.
people. So maybe
Yeah.
we can ease concerns, but also at the same time start to show people, yeah, something could start developing there. in the Caribbean coming up.
Right. So this is the GFS ensemble, and there's all of the ensemble members kind of showing Oscar pulling away. Then we start to watch down here in the Caribbean, watching in the Caribbean, starting to see those L's coming to life. I'll switch over to the member wise minimum, but you can kind of start to see this is Saturday, November 2nd, November 3rd, November 4th. You're starting to see all of these little elements. Now, if you're new to tracking the tropics, if this is something very new, it's not like we've got 25 tropical systems or 25. We're looking at 30 different versions of the GFS ensembles. And it's kind of like once it runs the operational, the GFS, then it goes back and overthinks everything 30 different ways. And that's how you get the ensemble members, right, Jeremy?
Yeah, and that's the GFS that you're looking at there. So, I mean, obviously, we showed the operational run and then filled in more context with this that models seem to be saying, hey, we're going to see low pressure form, but the final look of it and location, that is a huge spread when you're looking at maybe the western part of Cuba all the way into kind of the central Atlantic.
Right, right. So that's the GFS ensembles. Let me switch over to the European ensembles, and you'll notice that while what's interesting here, Jeremy, is that the operational European did not really show much in the Caribbean particularly, but watch these ensembles. The ensembles are throwing together some things from the Caribbean to the open Atlantic. And so I think our takeaway shouldn't be to focus on any one of these blobs, right? But a broader idea of for the better part of a week now, we've at least gotten some indication, and now the ensembles from run to run to run to run to run have something forming. A lot of people in my area though are so hurricane tired and so hurricane weary. I'm not saying it's hitting us. I'm not saying it's not, but I am saying that this is the model at least starting to wake up to something that's going to be a little closer than we'd like. And I think that's all we should take away from this moment. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a general time frame would be somewhere, give or take, it's a couple days around Halloween into that first week of November.
Right.
So that would be the time frame to watch. About every other year, we average a named storm during November. Only about 6% of all named storms occur during that month that we've had going back to the 1850s. So November typically a quieter month. Obviously, a couple of years ago, you can speak more to this, but you had Hurricane Nicole.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the thing, when we look at these numbers here, right? Like we know that the peak of hurricane season is September. But notice that late October into November, there's almost like a little mini peak here. And then once you get into November, it does start to drop off considerably. But Nicole hit. We've had plenty of systems in the month of November. You'll have to watch a little closer to home, but nevertheless, hurricane season isn't set in stone, and we say this a lot, right? Like Mother Nature doesn't exactly have a calendar, so we watch, but it that's all we can do, I think, at this point.
Yeah, and we've had, I believe, storms like almost every single month now. Like you can get subtropical
Yeah,
storms. So, but really, the heart of hurricane season. I think if we can get through that first week in November, see what this is looking like
yeah,
here, and then hopefully we can kind of wrap things up. But yeah, the seasonal forecast right now, we've had a pretty busy stretch here over the last like 4 to 6 weeks,
yep,
the last month or so, and it definitely has accelerated numbers upwards. We mentioned we're at 15 named storms, 10 hurricanes, and I believe it's up to four major hurricanes now.
yeah, yeah. And
Um,
and and based on that, just looking at the forecast numbers, you and I in March had called for 16 to 20 named storms, the lowest number of the grouping. And so, what we have 15, you said, right?
we're at 15 right now, and we think for sure there will be at least one more.
Yeah.
I would say let's anticipate a couple more.
Right. We've had 10 hurricanes. So you and I had called for 8 to 10. And we haven't changed our numbers, right? Like, so that's
Right.
another point to make. And then we had called for 3 to 5 major hurricanes. There have been 4 major hurricanes right now. So I'm very happy with where our numbers sit. Yeah, there's going to, I would suspect there's probably going to be one more named storm, so that would put it to 16, probably a hurricane, so that would put it to 11 hurricanes. I would love to not have the 11th hurricane, and certainly we'll see how
Right.
this plays out. But in terms of the numbers, I'm very happy with where we are, and looking at Colorado State and NOAA. I think that our numbers and our trends and our thought process is definitely not out to lunch there.
No, I'll say our forecast each and every year, whether it's this year, past years, we'll put it out there March 1st and put it up against any other forecast. And also, we have to note that we put out our hot spots, and 5 of the 6 U.S. landfalls this year fell within our hot spots, and most of those were within parts of the pattern we identified back in March. So,
I'm dialing that
um,
graphic up. Keep
okay.
talking.
All right. Yeah. So 5 out of 6 of the landfalls in the U.S. Remember, Debbie accounted for 2 of those, one in the Big Bend area, and then another one up there into the Carolinas. And again, that one track that you see up there, that was the potential tropical cyclone. We're not counting that one, but that's what that other line is closer to the Myrtle Beach area.
Yep.
And then we had Beryl. What was the other one? Francine. Was Francine the
Francine was in New Orleans, was in Louisiana. You had, what was it?
Yep.
Was it Debbie?
Yep. And then, of course, Helene and Milton. So those were the landfalls. Again, Debbie accounted for 2, the Big Bend, and curved back out and went north of the Charleston area. So 5 out of the 6 landfalls. And again, um, I think our forecast, I know we're very proud of it, where we had the date windows correct for Debbie and Helene.
Yep.
And we also discussed that if the pattern continued into October, that we could see something get close to Florida, and that's what Milton did. So
Yeah.
I think our forecast goes beyond the numbers. We like to say we try to go a little more in depth and provide a little more information. So
Yeah.
that's
I'm
what that's
very
I think that separates our forecast. And people, I always encourage people, look at every forecast, and then at the end you can compare them and see what happens after the season, because we
right.
don't know what the numbers are going to end up being, but we should hopefully in another month or so.
I'm proud of our work, my friend, and we are now in the time to get our tushes to work on the next forecast. But we talked a little bit about the numbers this season, so it's a good idea to at least look and see kind of where we are for this hurricane season versus where we've been. So, like as you mentioned, 15 named storms. The average through today's date is 12.8. We had 20 named storms last year through today's date, and that's interesting. Fewer storms this year than last year, and that'll play into our ACE comparison here in a moment.
Yeah. Also, I think one thing we stressed going into this season was maybe our numbers were just slightly lower than like the National Hurricane Center, Colorado State,
Yeah.
but we were also stressing that we thought the percent of hurricanes this year and major hurricanes would be higher. And
Yeah.
certainly that has played out this back half of the season.
Oh, 100%. 100% it has. And I think that that's in the numbers, and you'll see that in the ACE as well,
Hmm.
Jeremy.
So this is storm days right here. So we're running a little bit above average, not too far. Last year we were way above average. Remember, we had an additional 5 storms at this point in hurricane season, and last year there were no named storms during the month of November. It kind of wrapped up early, which was a good thing. And the ACE score right here, the accumulated cyclonic energy. We're above average right now, and we will finish above average. In normal seasons, about 120, and we're at 145 now. Looks like we're slightly ahead of last year.
And that's important because, like you said, we have 5 fewer storms this year than last year, but we have a higher ACE number. Why? Because the storms percentage wise have run stronger, which is the exact headline you and I came out with during the month of March. I
Hmm.
don't mean to pat ourselves on the back, but the pattern recognition there this year has been phenomenal. I'm again, I'm not patting us
Hmm.
on the back. I'm just, it's like science is amazing. I'm always amazed at that.
Yeah, and I know I've already looked ahead. Like I think in the last few days, NOAA came out with their winter forecast,
Yeah.
which one thing we always look at, but we tend to caution a little bit, is just doing it sort of an all-in ENSO forecast, which would be El Nino or La
Right.
Nina. And I think they're weighing their winter forecast pretty heavy on La Nina. But I do want to mention we're not truly in a La Nina yet. If you
Right.
go by the numbers, you need some specific criteria. Certainly, those waters are cooling, and as you say, there a La Nina could be forming. So I think last spring when we did our hurricane season forecast, it was for La Nina to be already going by, I believe, August or September,
Yep.
and we're still sort of waiting for the official La Nina to develop. So I'm kind of glad it didn't form sooner. That could have even accelerated hurricane season a bit more.
Yeah.
But I really like that when we make our forecasts, whether it's sort of medium range, long range, we're certainly taking into account any influence of a La Nina, El Nino, but we're also kind of looking at some other big picture items as well.
Yeah, well, and I think that we try to take it all into account, right? Whether it's Enzo, whether it's the Madden Julian Oslo, there's a million different things that we can look at, and I think that once we play all of them out, we do the best we can. I think we've done fine, and I think as well that we are very, very closely watching the pattern here these next few months to give us an idea of what next year will bring. So if you live in the Caribbean, if you have friends or family that live in the Caribbean, let them know things are probably looking a little busier for next hurricane season. But I mean, it's always busy down there, but
Right.
pattern recognition would dictate maybe that it's just a little bit busier than normal, which is certainly not anything that they want to hear.
Yeah, and one thing I know that we will be laser focused on once we sort of get through November and then we start to see if we can pick out like the cycle duration is that Milton storm. Was that more completely old pattern? It was sort of in that time window where we
Yeah.
start to see like new patterns start to develop. Is there a little bit old, a little bit new? If we would get into December, January, February, and that part of the pattern comes back and that low is kind of near Florida once again,
Yep.
then we would be like, okay, this is definitely something we'll have to factor in for next hurricane season.
It was right in that overlap. That makes it
Hmm.
so, so difficult and so,
Right.
so frustrating.
Yeah. But we'll get a couple looks at it
Yeah.
before we have to put our hurricane season forecast out. So,
Yeah. And
um,
it's also interesting, Jeremy, too, and now that you mention it, if I may, the Milton part of the pattern, if it carried from the old version, each time it cycled, wanted to tornado in South Florida. If you recall,
right.
in February, it was
Yep.
like Fort Lauderdale tornado. There was a Fort Myers tornadoes. So kind of there was like that indication of it wanted to tornado every time. So why should we be surprised that Milton threw what is probably on some metrics the broadest tornado outbreak in Florida state history? So it really does tie into the old cycle, but in that overlap,
Right.
it makes you one. It just makes you wonder. It's tough.
Yeah. So I mean, we'll get some looks at it, but yeah, as you mentioned, that was in all those notes I take. Each part of that pattern from last November through spring, when that recycled or kind of cycled around and occurred, it was definitely a tornado threat
Yeah.
for Florida. It was never a tornado threat in my area,
Yep.
and Milton was not much for my area. We had barely enough rain to get the sidewalk wet, and we had some wind gusts that were 30 or 40 miles per hour. But this
Mm.
has always been a Florida part of the pattern, so that's why we
Yeah.
think it's probably a little more old versus
Yeah.
new, but it's something that it's a tricky one and something that we'll probably have to really stay focused on moving forward.
And you'll know if it's a part of the new pattern. You'll know because if you're a Jeremy audience person, he's going to be tracking and mentioning it. And if you watch my coffee talk every morning, you know that if it comes around at a certain time frame, I'm going to be like, well, there it is. I don't hide things very well, as any friend of mine knows. So it is what it is. All right, questions? Anything at all? Taylor says things that make you say, yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, no one anywhere in the Gulf Coast, Southeast Florida needs any type of tropical system. Everyone's pretty wore out
Yeah.
from this season. I know ours kind of got going when we had a Debbie move through.
Yeah.
We had record rainfall over most of our area. And then, of course, when Helene came through, we had winds the top 70 miles per hour. I believe in Savannah, our peak gust was 76. So Helene did a lot of tree damage in our
Right.
area. before we started here, I mentioned, Eric, if you hear a chainsaw here in the distance, not just some Halloween sound effect here in the background. That is cleanup from
Yeah.
Halloween going on in my neighborhood. Took a while to get some tree crews in here, but they went where trees were on homes first, and now kind of getting to just the big limbs and other things that are down.
Yeah, and they're doing the same thing from Milton in my neighborhood. A bunch of our community trees laid down, so they're just having to lift them back up. But there are no chainsaws. They're just
Okay.
lifting them and like replanting. So, all right. So people are asking. So no hurricane coming to Florida, right? It's too early to tell anything. But
Yeah.
late October into early November, we'll have to watch things. That's kind of that's just the idea. This is the area, the next area of interest. I think it's probably this hurricane season's last most favorable window. So we'll watch, we'll see, and of course, we'll keep you up to date. Anything else to add, Jeremy?
No, and I would say a week from now, obviously, we'll be closer, and we'll probably see if a low is trying to form down there, and we'll have a very good idea. But maybe even late this week, if all of a sudden every single model's latched on and it's looking like this hurricane is forming and might threaten closer to the U.S., certainly we can hop on and maybe do an update. But until next Tuesday, hopefully things stay quiet.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it, right? Like if the models are saying something, Jeremy and I will pop on. If you don't, it's kind of like a doctor. We are no doctor. If you don't hear from us, that's good news, right? Like if you hear
Right.
from us, that means there's something to watch. So, a lot of people like Mike mentioned on my page and on yours, I see GFS showing a big hurricane close to the Outer Banks. We already discussed that. Water temperatures up there are like in the 60s. So we'll have to wait for consistency. Consistency breeds confidence. Trends are your friends. Let's watch the trends and then we'll go from there. We're not here to hype, and that's not something Jeremy, you or I will ever do.
No, and if we get another name storm, the next one will be Patty.
Yep. All right. Very good. Hey, thank you, Jeremy, for your time, buddy. Look forward to not talking to you on a broadcast forum at least until next
Yeah.
Tuesday, hopefully.
All right. So until we get to then, until we get to next Tuesday in Savannah, Georgia, I'm WJCL 22 Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson.
And I'm Wesh 2 Meteor.